countries to manage their wars and conflicts.
University, sorry. We had followed in the morning Professor Manuel Castle, Social Media and Political Polarization paper. He's a professor in Los Angeles. Through Zoom, he said that social media is not causing political polarization, it reflects the social or the political polarization in the community. So we're going to talk about international balances of power and their impact on the structure and performance of social media networks. We have with us Dr. Bruce Mutsvairo, Dr. Mohammed Eraji, Mr. Nigel Nyamutumbu, and Mr. Mohammed Al-Bouzidi. So we're going to talk about the international conflicts and how they impact knowledge production. So as we've seen with Cambridge Analytica, these networks are used ideologically in order to serve the interests of international players, especially during international crisis and conflict, which causes ideological and political polarization. We've also heard Professor Manuel Castells talking about this dynamic that creates a very complicated network, and there are no ready-made solutions for it. We have with us Dr. Bruce Mutsvairo from Holland, and he is mainly focused on three issues: interaction between journalism and democracy, also freedom of the press and safety of professors in journalists in times of conflicts, and digital and data dissident citizen journalists and activists' use of online-based technologies, including social media platforms, to influence political change under the prevailing misinformation ecology. Decoding detailed participation through the promotion of social practices. Welcome, Professor Mutsvairo. You have the floor.
Thank you so much.
شكرا جزيلا.
I would like to begin by thanking the organizers for inviting me. One common feature that is often associated with digital technologies pertains to how they are seen to be transforming the global economy or bringing the much needed innovation to modern day societies. To this end, the number of people who own smartphones or those who have access to the internet has been rising in the majority world, or what some prefer to call the global south. Yet, it is rather the lack of region or country-specific understandings on how our interactions with tech-driven societal transformations, including the interdependence of communication infrastructures, that I feel has received minimum attention. While high rates of social media use continue to be registered in non-Western societies, it's the idea that technology comes with progressiveness and modernity that can no longer be sustained. And as computer systems are being lined up to replace human intelligence, I'm wondering who is to blame? What got us here in the first place? Is it just the tech companies that should take the blame? Or we should be asking ourselves, what about generations of constantly bored people who have been sold a dummy to believe Henry Jenkins' participatory culture bodes well with their context? I mean, who seriously sees themselves as participants? What does participating really mean? And I'm referring here to Henry Jenkins' participatory culture theory. liking a message, being an influencer? Are you really participating, or you have been made to believe you are? Are you a participant or are you a consumer? Thinking as hard as I could think, I've had to come to terms with the fact that perhaps there is no solution to this. We as a society have been enslaved. We have been hoodwinked. Obviously, hegemonic forces have or seem to have won over us. The same forces that Adorno, Horkheimer, and Herbert Marcuse warned us were the brains behind the cultural industries that were meant to use media messages to manipulate us. Today, they tell us they only offer a service. They apparently have no power. They are just a mere mediator. Uber is apparently there to make our lives better. Airbnb is good for us. Really. The point being, who is not a consumer? Is there any way to escape ubiquitous consumerism that these platforms promote? Have we forgotten about the power that we have? Is it because of this inescapable social dilemma that we have decided to give in? Yes, maybe it's too late to disconnect now. Obviously, digital detoxing isn't the long-term answer. Yet, I believe we have an obligation to educate current and future generations on the dangers of social media. We have stood up against colonialism. Where was Facebook then? We stood up against all the isms and schisms, as Bob Marley called them. Henceforth, the idea that technology is an enabler can no longer stay unchallenged. Maybe Evgeny Morozov was right when he talked about the net delusion in 2011. There won't be any progress until, I believe, we realize social media platforms aren't meant for us. We need to go back to the basics. Let's go back to the communities in Africa, the Arab world, Asia, Latin America, and for once, listen to these people. Facebook has given us a voice. No, but we already had a voice before Facebook. There will never be voices or opportunities to voice our concerns on Facebook bigger than what we did as a society in the pre-Facebook years. The point being, let's abandon the bubble that platforms give us new knowledge. We are the knowledge. Real knowledge is with the people. Collaborating with the communities, therefore, offers us an opportunity to think about where we got it wrong in the first place. Yes, we have written books and we continue to have aspirations to write books, but our source of knowledge, I believe, is in the people, particularly the elders in the village, who perhaps cannot operate a smartphone, but they have lived to see how deceitful technologies from guns to online games can be. People have historically played an instrumental role in advocating social change. Instead of simply telling everybody to adopt these technologies, it's important instead to question them, like many scholars, including Castells, before us, has been doing for much of his adult life. On the African continent, radio, just 48%, television, 35%, are still preferred, according to recent 2021 statistics, sources of news. Only 22% of the continent relies on social media for news. So it means here we got some work to do, and I believe technological divides are real. Last but not least, certainly, social media isn't the only source of knowledge, or isn't even the source of knowledge. The religious leader, the community leader, I believe, are sources of knowledge, tried and tested, that we as a society sadly despise them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mustabairo, and for this thought-provoking paper. والآن سننتقل إلى الدكتور محمد الراجي.
Now we listen to Dr. Muhammad Al-Rajhi, who will try to explore the strategies of social media networks in producing ideologies and rhetorical dominance, a study of Israeli discourse on Twitter and Facebook. Dr. Muhammad Al-Rajhi is a researcher in Al Jazeera Center for Studies, oversees the Media Studies program, and he runs the Al Jazeera Journal for Media and Communication. He edits Lubab, issued by Al Jazeera Center for Studies 2019-2022. He is an academic supervisor in Al Jazeera program for field studies. Among his most prominent research works are as editor, The Environment of Arab Electronic Journalism, the Context of Developments and Prospects, and the Power of Social Media. And as author, chapters in books such as Al Jazeera narrates a story, in-depth studies, as well as the power of social media and its impact on conventional media networks and the political environment. Dr. Muhammad Al-Rajhi. Thank you, Dr. Hala. Thank you so much. I would also like to thank the presidency of this conference for the support we've received during the preparation of this paper. We also thank the scientific committee that allowed us to attend this conference. We will revolve around a number of points, or theoretical points, and then the conceptual network and the ideological Israeli discourse manifestations, and the social media strategy to further the dominance of the Israeli discourse. As we all notice, social media networks exercise what is called a discourse power on interactive discourses. So the activity of the users is or follows a certain hierarchy according to their access or accessibility. So we have a preferential accessibility or a more restricted accessibility to the discourse. So we will see in this discrepancy or in this difference users that are contributing to producing this discourse, and some others will be found on the margins of the discourse and of the social media. As such, the control of the indicators of the discourse, its manifestations, and its producers will be better controlled. So the more restricted the access, the more restricted or the more limited the users use. Some of them would be banned from or prohibited from publishing a story, a cartoon, or even reposting. So this is limited or restricted access. So the preferential access would be one of the main elements to continue this dominance, because the discourse, just like precious social resources that is very valuable for the authorities, so it cannot be allowed to everyone. The access to discourse cannot be allowed to everyone. So this dichotomy, or these two things, restricted and preferential access, explains to us how social media networks are trying to dominate the rhetoric. So you would find users their access to social media networks very limited, very restricted, while other users are allowed just regular access. We look at the example of the users from the Israeli army who have preferential access, and they have employed a number of opinion writers and journalists to turn social media networks to a war zone or a war space, like a virtual war space, and they militarize the digital space. So you see them publishing their own stories and war stories. We're talking about the war on Palestinians in different circumstances and on different occasions. The example I worked on was from Israeli writers and journalists, as you can see, a number of accounts, 8 accounts for journalists, Jay Mayam and Eddie Cohen. These are researchers and journalists, as well as Israel in Arabic page, and Adrai, Khidai Adrai. So this happened between Jan 2022 and the end of 2022. It went in parallel with the operation on Gaza and the killing of Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. And here I'm going to skip the methodological vision of the paper, which will be published later on. So we've relied on a number of concepts to analyze this hypothesis, which is the privileged or restricted access, by talking about the concept of the new algorithm power. We're talking about a number of mathematical equations translated into codes, and with the input of data from the real world with a specific aim or objective. So they have a clear function. So they do not come from the void. They are born out of the intellectual structure of those who create these algorithms. So it is not born out of a void. So we're talking about the decision-making algorithms through a number of softwares that are analyzed and are very effective. So by algorithms, we're talking about a certain text, a certain discourse that carries a number of concepts. So this linkage between the algorithm and the text refers us to a discourse practice, because the text is a discourse practice or rhetorical practice. So it doesn't come out of the void. It's not an absolute mathematical equation. It comes with specific goals, and I think Dr. Fatma Zahra has elaborated on it, and she has a research paper in Lubab journal. She spoke about social engineering or public social engineering, or social engineering to the public. So this concept is linked, as we mentioned, with a lot of intellectual load, which directs or orients the whole process. We skip the details to say that algorithms in general are able, when linked to the rhetorical practice, to give us options, categorization, sorting, and identification of issues and topics, and do other functions as well. Amongst the concepts that we've resorted to is the discourse or rhetorical dominance. Ideological and rhetorical dominance. So this is a cognitive framework that goes in different directions, and the ideology is only ideology when linked to dominance. So it has to have the dominance or hegemony element to it for it to become an ideology. So it is symbolic and has a meaning as much as it works within specific social and community frameworks to build for something, as long as it doesn't cater to those conditions. For example, the study by John Thompson, a very well-known sociologist. So he links ideology to the need for dominance. So by dominance we mean directing a discourse towards one specific direction. So after this introduction, we are going to present to you the Israeli discourse, ideological discourse, and its patterns through examining the sample I've mentioned, around 8 Israeli accounts that I showed you on the screen. What's noteworthy here in the Israeli discourse is that we will notice it is built on what some researchers call ideological square, where Twin Van Dyck, analyzed thoroughly. As you notice, it focuses on self and an attempt at highlighting or accentuating the positive aspects, the positive characteristics, while trying to minimize the others. And here they try to highlight the Israeli self positively, while also depicting the Palestinian self or identity very negatively. And this goes to show the conflict between the Israeli and the Palestinian selves or identities. So this polarization furthers the power of the speaker, its ethical dominance, while also minimizing and undermining the confidence in the other identity. Amongst the typologies of this Israeli ideological discourse is the ideology of legitimization. This is one of the categorizations of John Thompson. In order to build relations of dominance and preserve them by showcasing the legitimacy of the causes raised in the Israeli discourse. What the Palestinians consider as occupation of their own land is viewed by the Israelis as a return of the Israeli people to their own land. So they're trying to legitimize the Israeli existence or presence through all means. First, through very rational basis, by relying on international law and international legitimacy decisions. That's the first condition. The second condition is the conventional basis, which is the religious principles and beliefs, saying that the Israelis were the first people to occupy this land or to live in this land, and they try to legitimize their presence through conventional means, which are the religious beliefs. And the third criteria is the exceptional characteristics of Israel as a democracy amongst other countries. That's the first type of ideology. There is another type
by studying this rhetoric, which is
وهي تستخدم هذه الايديولوجيا لتشويه حركه المقاومه مثلا فتلاحظون
not highlighting any resistance movement. If you notice that in the August 2022 aggression of Israel against Gaza, the victims during that war was from the resistance itself. So they're trying to
وكل الشبكات الدوليه بان الاسرائيليين فعلا كانوا مسؤولين عن الضحايا
we're trying not to shed light on the facts, which is that most of the victims were from the resistance.
ايديولوجيا لاحظ معي هنا لاحظوا
And
معي
if you
إيديولوجيا
notice,
التوحيد.
there is
عندنا
also this
الإيديولوجيا
ideology of unification, which is the third type,
خلال النصوص التي طلعت
through
عليها
the texts
ستجد
that I analyzed. You would see that this
ومساندة
pattern
القوية للجيش
tries to depict the assistance and support to the Israeli army. So the unification of people behind the army and highlight the achievements of the Israeli army. And this is what we have seen on BBC Arabic.
ولذلك هو
So this attempt to unification
النوع
is also unifying this discourse. There is a totally an opposite
البون الشاسع بين القيادات
pattern that tries to
الباقي الجمهور الفلسطيني هو يقدم نفسه ضحايا ويعيش في مأساة داخل
highlight how Palestinians are living in a tragedy in Gaza. So this is something that
يبرز دور القيادة
affects the psychology
تعيشها التي يعيشها
by highlighting the tragedy of
هناك أيضا
Palestinians.
إيديولوجيا التشيع هذه النمذجة هذه
There is
التي
also a
دراسة
five-winged
التشيع هو أن يجعل القضية الفلسطينية خارج التاريخ أصلا يعني لا تستحق أن يلتفت إليها وإنما الواقع
an
الموجود
attempt
اليوم
to
مثل ما تلاحظوا أن
disregard the Palestinian
بالنسبة للخطاب الإسرائيلي
cause, which was inexistent for the Israeli rhetoric.
الانتداب البريطاني وبعد ذلك
While or when highlighting the fact that Palestine was under the British colonization. So there is a turning of facts here.
أنك ما يتمتع به الفلسطينيون هو من منحة من الإسرائيلي على
So it's as if what's happening in Palestine is considered or is seen and depicted as being part of what's happening in Israel, and therefore the Palestinians do not have the right to call for a state of their own.
مثلا إذا قرأنا هذه
This is
اسحقوهم سحقا
a tweet that I would like to highlight here with you, which says crush them and crush them all about Palestinians.
المكونات العينة كلهم على قلب رجل واحد وبالتالي معبئين خلف المؤسسة العسكرية
So we see here
بارز
this
بشكل قوي
rhetoric
أن تكاد
that
بأن
is dominant in Israel. It leads us to say that
الصحفيين وهؤلاء
all the journalists and the academics
الأخبار
have their own newsroom. They have the same newsroom. They
الكاريكاتير يتم
publish the same discourse and the same caricature.
ربما أنتقل لنقطة أخيرة
Let me move now to one last point
الأخوة الكرام كل هذه الأنماط الإيديولوجية
and say that all these ideologies
تعرفونه يسمى بالهاسبرة
are
اللي هو
what is known the
الدعاية
Hasbara,
الإسرائيلية،
which is
سواء
the
طبعاً الموجهة
Israeli
للخارج،
promotion and advertising of what is happening within Israel and spread and published abroad.
نقطة أخيرة
One last
وإن كانت هي التي
point,
صلب صراحة تمثل صلب
which
البحث
is the heart of this research, which is the strategies adopted by social networks
سنلاحظ
in
مجموعة من الاستراتيجيات
promoting
هنا
the
ما يمكن أن نسميه بالغمر
Israeli
النصي
rhetoric
داخل
dominance.
الشبكة.
Within
والغمر مثل ما
this
تعرفون هو
network,
أن تفيض
there is an
الجوانب مكان
attempt
معين
to
بما تشغله ستلاحظون أن الشبكات التواصل الاجتماعي فيها تدفق
try to
تدفق يفيض من كل
lead
المستخدمين
to an overflow by
هذا
all
الفيضان،
users. This flood of
داخل
content
المحتوى،
within or a flood of the content is like a public mobilization for the producers of discourse and rhetoric. If Dr. Hala would give me one more minute to tackle another pattern of these strategies, we talked about the flooding in the content and the recycling of texts. You would find that all researchers and journalists are trying to promote the same discourse among themselves. Generally put,
قبل ما أقول إجمالا أتوقف عند هذه الاستراتيجية الأخيرة وهي استراتيجية
I would like to talk about the rhetorical manipulation strategy. In these texts and the sample of my study, you would see that Israeli researchers and journalists are trying to provide misleading and fake facts. And I would like to elaborate further on what I mentioned in the Q&A session. I would like to thank you, Dr. Mohammed Al-Raji. We move now to Mr. Nigel Niamutumbo on accountability and transparency in social media and the fight against fake news. Mr. Nigel is a media development practitioner, currently serving as the head of secretariat of a network of 9 media professional associations in Zimbabwe and includes professional associations and support organizations. He has over a decade experience in media and freedom of expression development work, and he was involved in the revision of the African Commission on Human Rights on Human and People's Rights Declaration on Freedom of Expression and access to information. He is also influencing the Zimbabwean legal reform framework. He also works as a columnist and contributor to the local weekly paper The Standard in Zimbabwe. We would like to welcome you, Mr. Niamutumbo, and we give you the floor.
Thank you very much, moderator, and thanks to the organizers for bringing together this particular discussion at a time that indeed the Global South, as is the Global North, are grappling with how to hold social media accountable and how we can be transparent on these platforms. As you may already know, there's a global conversation around TikTok right now, particularly with the European Union, and also in the United States of America, part of which measures speak to the challenges that social media are posing within the public sphere and within the communication sphere. My submissions are largely informed by Southern Africa context and seek really to zoom in from experience from that end. So in my discussion, I will just begin by breaking down what seems to be the challenge. I will use the COVID-19 context as an example of this a challenge around transparency and accountability in social media. I'll try to define some of the forces, their fears and interests, and also then begin to discuss fact-checking as a means and a tool that is being mooted or that is being used in light of the existing realities, in light of the existing context, and make a case for strengthening journalism as a way of ensuring that even though these particular platforms in Southern Africa in particular are dominating and are the means at which citizens are accessing information, they could access information that is credible. They could access information that they can hold the purveyors accountable, and indeed the use of their data and information could be transparent. So the first challenge that my submission poses is that access to the internet is broadly defined in terms of access to social media. So in the morning session, you will notice that there was a conversation around how there is now increased usage of the internet, increased usage of social media. In the Global South, what is even driving the access to the internet is access to social media. And that on its own poses two fundamental problems. The first being the social media that the users are accessing is not indigenously owned. The social media that citizens are accessing is also driven by a commercial imperative, is also driven by a certain interests that are outside the consumers, that are outside the citizenry. So in essence, what you then have in terms of trying to hold or trying to strengthen accountability and trying to strengthen transparency is the predominant dominance of actors that the states or the nation states do not actually have control over. And in essence, we remain now at the mercy and at the hands of those that own this social media. In Southern Africa in particular, you find that the use, what's driving the use of social media is predominantly WhatsApp, and it's predominantly the companies that is owned by Meta. Then the second challenge being the unintended consequences of this expanded freedom of expression space. I think there's one fundamental question that Bruce poses around whether indeed we are participants or we are consumers. And if we are indeed participants, to what extent is our participation adding a value or adding to the discourse insofar as the public sphere is concerned? Or our participation really pertains to a culture of consumerism, really also pertains and relates to us having another platform to convey hate, to have another platform to sustain existing stereotypes, whether stereotypes of race, whether of sexism, homophobia, and so forth. And then there's the challenge of an appetite to control the information space, which include provisions that criminalize freedom of expression. And this particular challenge is further augmented by these unintended consequences of an expanded freedom of expression space, where there is the shrinking of democratic space in the name of trying to address the challenges that come with the expanded freedom of expression space. And this intention to control and regulate the information space has its patterns pre the internet era through the introduction of statutory regulatory frameworks and through the weaponization of the law. And then there's also the challenge of lack of transparency in use of personal information and broadly data. And this challenge also emanates from the first problem where whilst our access to the internet is driven by the access to social media, it is those platforms that we neither control nor have dictated upon. Yet they have access, over our personal information, access over our movements, access insofar as our behavioral pattern online. And then the question of digital security and the intention to address cybercrime is another challenge. So I submit in my discussion the attempts to try and entrench accountability and transparency by using the COVID-19 pandemic dilemma that was posed there. In that, the COVID-19 pandemic presents an interesting case study around managing the competing interests, particularly trying to define and strike a balance between the democratic regulation of social media, as it were, and managing the information. So in the global south, particularly in Southern Africa, the COVID-19 pandemic became a period in which where we saw an introduction of vague and broad clauses around most governments introduced statutory instruments. And in these statutory instruments, there were various provisions that were introduced targeting social media. The intentions to entrench accountability and transparency on social media had always been there, but COVID-19 then provided a perfect opportunity where clauses as broad as one having, getting arrested for being a WhatsApp administrator, or one possibly facing a criminal, penalties for exercising a view on social media. And this then, posed a challenge in now trying to draw that delicate line between promoting transparency, promoting accountability, yet at the same time preserving freedom of expression. And therefore, they began to have minimum room for academic debate, including in the medical sphere, as the information during that period, or during the case of the COVID-19 pandemic, became top-down, where there was almost an information cohesion as a means to hold social media users accountable, and as a means to generate information. And there were these rampant conspiracy theories on social media, including but not limited to influencers, which prompted these accountability measures. Fake news, although it is like an oxymoron, because if it is fake, it can't be news, on the pandemic and measures on social media, really further polluted the information space, thereby, prompting measures to be taken. So what you then began to notice emerging as part of this trajectory was the attempt by the various governments and by state actors to manufacture consent. In other words, the power that be offline in its various, manifestations, whether commercial power, military power, state power, and so forth, began to take much more stake online, fueling, this ideological polarization, which took center stage at the expense of facts, at the expense of truth, or at the expense of credible information. Algorithms and influencers were existing to affirm existing preferred debates. And what you would notice is people normally would then access information that confirms their existing biases. And thereby, social media merely just becoming a new battlefield and instrument of exercise of soft power. Naturally, in the global south, there's this appetite of introduction of extreme measures, including, internet shutdowns, throttling. Throttling is now being used more and more to try and disrupt some of these social media platforms. And all this is in that attempt to manufacture consent. And as I, moving to the last slides, the forces are predominantly in the state and within the ruling elite, with the fears of losing control over what is consumed in the information space, but more so lately, the commercial imperative. I think the case of Uganda is quite telling, as is the case in some African countries, where they also now want a slice of the cake, to say, yes, we understand we have no control over these platforms, we have no control over what is being consumed, but we can certainly want to also have control insofar as what you are making or what you are taking out as resources. There are fears of privacy. I think the case of TikTok at the moment is due to the privacy issues as well as security and interference. And in the global south, it's also a question of cultural norms and values that you know, augment or that make people which you know, are prompting this accountability. So as I am wrapping up, I make a submission to say, I think insofar as holding social media accountable and promoting a culture of transparency, we need to invest in fact checking, because disinformation, or if you want fake news or misinformation and so forth, it has short legs, it can be challenged in real time, and there is scope for promoting a behavioral change, because I don't think we'll be at a stage to advance the decolonization of platforms at this particular stage. But what we can is to support and invest in the, you know, in changes in behavioral or in changes in patterns on how these are being used. And fact checking can actually also be a tool and form of promoting self-regulation. And it can only also thrive through partnership with credible media and through partnership with the dominant social media platforms to say, if they're going to be using algorithms, if they're going to be using AI, artificial intelligence, and so forth, it has to be on the basis of information that is credible. It has to be on the basis on information that is organically driven and on information that is knowledge driven. And I also then make the case for strengthening credible journalism, recognizing that lately we now have journalists that are more popular than the outlets they work for, or than the news media outlets that would know. And therefore, there is scope now to begin to target those and equip them. Investment in new forms of media and journalism, including data journalism, where we can have new ways of packaging news and information, and partnership with these big tech companies, insofar as us beginning to use credible information as the way of holding, of strengthening accountability and transparency on social media. And, you know, alternative forms of social media regulation and strengthening the accountability mechanisms for the media, restoring credibility. I know UNESCO recently just had a conference around the internet and how it can build trust. So my key conclusions really are the need for partnerships and support for fact-checking as an instrument for building social media accountability, enhanced transparency in making the social media space a safe space for all, and strengthening quality journalism as a critical agent of credible information on social media. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Niamatombo. وندعو إلى المنصة الآن الباحث محمد
We
البوزيدي.
call upon Mohammed Bouzedi, researcher, who's going to speak about framing the issue of Ukrainian Middle Eastern refugees and asylum seekers in the tweets of French press. He's a journalist and researcher specializing in communications and media, served as visiting lecturer at the Doha Institute of Graduate Studies. He also partnered with various Qatari government institutions as a media producer of media content. He is currently working on a PhD on protest movements in contemporary France by adopting a media approach. He obtained master's degree in media science and cultural studies and bachelor's degree in mass communications from Qatar University. We welcome Mr. Mohammed Bouzedi. شكرا جزيلا على
which is just really, an important thematic that is, social media networks and and ideological polarizations, which is, really an important topic. So I would like to share some of my findings with you about concerning the framing of Ukrainian and Middle Eastern refugees and asylum seekers in the news of French press shared on Twitter. This is a correction of what you have in your presentation. So this is the concern was on the news shared on news on Twitter accounts of French newspapers. So not tweets but news, the whole news. So I start by asking two main questions. The first of all has to do with with the general features. So I ask what were the most frequently reflected features during the coverage of Ukrainian and Middle Eastern refugees and asylum seekers across French newspapers. And the second question posed was how did the frames vary in the coverage of Ukrainian and Middle Eastern refugees and for the Middle Eastern refugees and asylum seekers by French newspapers. So to answer these questions, I need the methodology. The methodology used here is a quantitative technique of content analysis with the composite week sampling, which resulted in 2 constructed weeks representative of 6 months period, which is the time frame of the study. The sample size harvested 306 news articles, and the unit of the analysis was the entire news article. Here are news outlets I used during the analysis. So first of all, the first newspaper is Le Monde, which adheres a central leftist point of view, and Le Figaro from a rightist point of view. La Croix, Catholic, represents a Catholic viewpoints, and Libération leftist viewpoints. So please remember this diversity in terms of political spectrums of each of the newspapers, because as I go forward, you can just remember what I'm talking about. For the intercoder reliability, I hired 2 coders for the purpose of these studies. Before that, I developed a code book which includes 18 descriptive variables and 14 framing devices. The intercoder reliability results was greater than 0.8 Krippendorf's alpha, which was agreed upon adequate for conducting a content analysis in media and communication studies, because it takes on chance agreements. The distribution of the news, as you can see here, there is a fluctuation in distribution of the news sampled, because as I mentioned before, I used a random sampling method, which resulted in this. You can see in the first 2 days, I harvested almost a third of the news, which were really important, and fluctuation goes all the way until the end of the sampling days. So Le Figaro published more news stories than the other news outlets, and Le Monde issues longer stories. You can see here that the average length of each newspaper is really considerable. Le Monde is 1567, Libération is 1077, La Croix is 948, and Le Figaro is 918, which was really a considerable and massive coverage in terms of length. For the descriptive variables, overall, there was a massive focus on Rus origins, as you can see here in the table, which, with the growing interest to blame the government policy towards the Ukrainian refugees and asylum seekers at the expense of the Middle Eastern refugees and asylum seekers. Le Monde and Libération were consistent of blaming government policies towards the Ukrainians, and La Croix blamed government policies toward Middle Eastern Ras, which was really interesting here to decipher that a Catholic newspaper was it's like, you know, drew more focus on the Middle Easterns at the expense of the Ukrainians, but the others concentrates their attention to cover issues related to the Ukrainian refugees and asylum seekers. Le Monde accused Middle Eastern refugees and asylum seekers more frequently than did the others. But Le Figaro emphasized the disruption caused by the Ukrainian refugees and asylum seekers more than the rest. These differences were all found statistically significant, as we can see here in the table. Regarding the overall frame, frame, you know, in the Ukrainian context, so the most used frames were conflict, action, social consequences, hope, and contextual frames. And the least used frames was religion and morality. Freeman immigration used in the Ukrainian context proved to be diverse across all newspapers, with an average of all or at least 6 frames per newspaper. So this is per a news article. So here, as you can see, you can just remember with me. You can see the numbers. The percentage in the y-axis is above 60%. You know, in the best for the context. As compared to the Ukrainian, there is, you know, some differences, big differences, because here the most used doesn't exceed 40%, so which is really an important finding to have. This is an overall usage of frame. So here also the most used frame was contextual and social consequences and action frame, and less frame was the religion and morality. Frame and immigration news proved to be less diverse across all newspapers compared to the Ukrainians, at the expense of the human interest and sympathy narratives that might influence the public attitudes toward the Middle Eastern refugees and asylum seekers. Regarding the frame and analysis per each news articles and per each newspaper, so overall there is a massive use of frames, all or at least 6 framing categories at once per news story, as you can see here, with Le Monde, Le Figaro, and Libération used most of the frames in the context of Ukrainian news, as compared to La Croix, which was quite moderate in framing the Ukrainian Rus, which is really an important finding here to underline. Regarding the Middle Eastern refugees and asylum seekers news, you can see the verses. The contrary, La Croix was highly concerned to cover the issues related to the Middle Eastern refugees and asylum seekers more importantly than did its counterparts. Namely Le Monde, Le Figaro, and Libération. With growing interest of Libération here, that's found to be quite, drawing more attention on framing the events related to the Middle Eastern Rus news. So to recap, the events of immigration news was prominent across all newspapers, with some fluctuation in terms of the number of news harvested in each sample day, and also there was another focus on refugees and asylum seekers' origins and the blame of the government's policies toward the Ukrainian refugees and asylum seekers at the expense of the Middle Eastern, as I said before. So the French press preferred the Eastern European refugees and asylum seekers at the expense of the Middle Easterns. Concerning the framing analysis, so the most used frames were conflict, action, social consequences, hope, and contextual frames, as compared to the Ukrainian side, the Middle Eastern side, which were contextual, social consequences, and action frames. Le Monde, Le Figaro, and Libération were consistent in their strategies despite the distinct ideological spectrums, with significant differences, with diverse content, with the conflicts and societal tenets overemphasized. La Croix, the Catholic paper focused mainly on or showed a concern about the Middle Eastern refugees and asylum seekers with a moderate framing of the Ukrainians, and the contextual and action were emphasized mostly. The bottom lines are, except for Libération, French newspapers were cautious to blame the government policies of reception, deportation of refugees and asylum seekers groups, especially the Middle Easterns, and French news reportage functioned within presets of stereotypes and cultural paradigms, a tradition that could be fostering negative attitudes toward these groups. And despite all of that, all the newspapers showed significant differences in between them when considering the frequency of use of frames. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. شكرا أستاذ.
Thank you, Mr. Muhammad. We have 15 minutes for questions. طب ليه ما already مأخرين؟ So we will take a number of questions. In the name of God. أود أن أشكر جميع المشاركين في هذه الجلسة. She's enumerating the speakers. I have two questions. The first one for Dr. Muhammad Al-Raqi. I have a question for you, and I would like to thank you for the excellent presentation you've put in, an excellent analysis of the rhetorical ideology, especially in the context of Israeli discourse, one of the most important causes for us in the Arab world. I wanted to raise the issue of how the Israeli discourse changes facts and truth. And a number of times, such news or such propaganda doesn't last. Despite that, non-persuasive communication continues with the audience. So how does the social media interact with such a type of discourse? I think just like lies are short-lived, the same for propaganda. How is the social media interacting with such propaganda? I think at the end of the day, those lies are very short-lived. سؤالي الثاني لسيد نايجل نياموتومبو. تحدثتم عن الأخبار الملفقة والمضللة ومساءلة المجتمع. الأخبار المضللة قد ظهرت أهميتها لا سيما في الأوقات الحساسة، الاستفتاءات، الانتخابات، ولكن هناك مشكلة هنا، وهي أن الأخبار المضللة هي مفيدة للكثير من المواقع الإلكترونية.
More complicated. How can we build a civilian society of defenders, defending the truth, defending the reality, defending the actual, the reality, the truth? How can we build a civilian society of truth defenders, apart from the state institutions and the formal organizations that many times they are spreading fake news? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Fatima.
شكرا. السلام عليكم. أشكر جميع البانelists.
Thank all the panelists. And I have a question to Dr. Mohammed El-Raji, actually, regarding the lies that are presented to the media. Isn't there a full-fledged mechanism or system that the governments are working for, not only through the media, and they all support one another? Because at the end of the day, we're talking about an international political decision. So who holds the authority? Who is the decision maker? So here lies the issue, how to influence them. Thank you.
السلام عليكم. أنا طالبة حنين زايد.
حنين زايد, student
جامعة قطر.
from Qatar University, Press and TV.
أطرح سؤال
I would like to ask a question to Dr. Mohammed El-Raji.
أول سؤال هو
The first question,
من وجهة نظرك أستاذ
from your
متى سوف
perspective,
تنتهي
sir,
الصراعات الدولية أو متى سوف تتوقف وسائل التواصل
when will
الاجتماعي
the social media
على
networks
نشر الكراهية وتصبح وسيلة
stop
لنشر
fomenting the hate speech, and when will they come a tool to build peace? The second question,
الآن الكنيسة الإسرائيلية تصوت اليوم على قانون إعدام الأسرى.
the Israeli Knesset is today voting a law to apply capital punishment on Palestinian detainees.
تسن القوانين الدولية.
My question is to in whose interest are international laws drafted?
Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank the four panelists.
أود أن أشكر المتحدثين.
Presentation, in fact. And I just have just one question for all of you, if you'd like, individually or collectively, to answer. That is, the extremely important issues and challenges that all of you have raised from different perspectives, in fact, cannot be well addressed if we ignore the fact that media capitalism and social media capitalism, social media power and media power are a manifestation of media capitalism. Again, social media power is a manifestation of social media capitalism that struggles against transparency, accountability, diversity of ideologies, diversity of voices, equalization, respect of others, and also struggle to perpetuate the current and existing powers and inequality between those who have and those who have not. This is the question I hope that you can answer collectively or
شكرا
individually.
دكتور بسيوني. نأخذ سؤالين أخيرين. Just take 2 more questions. There is one there.
Thank you very much. My question actually is for Mr. Nigel. As we know, search engines powered by AI are now on the rise. For example, Microsoft Bing and, of course, ChatGPT. And what I want to know is how will this affect the credibility and accountability of news in the future? Because a lot of journalists will be using ChatGPT as a source of information, because now people say that it's more trusted than Google and other normal search engines. So I would like you to talk and comment on how those search engines will be affecting the future of credibility of news. Thank you very much.
One more question, and we have somebody over there. She was raising her hand for a long time.
We thank the organizers for this conference. Now, in terms of the types of Israeli discourse, he mentioned a number of ideologies followed by this discourse. Including the forced disintegration discourse and the discourse that consolidates the elements or the components of the Israeli community. My question: in view of these studies, are there any ideologies, are there any tools or means that the Arab media can use in order to fight such a discourse? Thank you. A last question. لدي سؤال للسيد
Thank you. Yes. Before I hand it over to the speakers, I just have one question. Because I'm the moderator, I have to ask a question. So, Mr. Bruce, I have a question for you about your proposition that we, especially in Africa, we have to go back to our traditional media and traditional communication systems. My question or concern: how do we? I want to hear your thoughts about how do we ensure that we are not perpetuating another issues of social injustices. For example, I mean, traditional media and traditional communication system has always been contested arena. And people, I mean, we know that even within Africa as a global or within the global south, there are power dynamics and power relationships. So how do we make sure that if we go back to the pre-social media, that we ensure that the people who were traditionally excluded from the mainstream narratives, they have a voice? Thank you. I think who wanna start? Mr. Muhammad, Dr. Raji, you had.
شكرا على التفاعل مع المداخلة التي قدمتها.
I would like to thank everyone for interacting with my presentation. It would be difficult for me to answer the questions one by one. However, allow me to give some general observations in brief. Through the research outputs as part of this conference, these outputs will give answers to some of your questions. In my study, we noticed that platforms in general, as Mitchell Foucault say, is the a social ownership of discourse. Other researchers such as Twin Van Dyke used other expressions in relation to the use of social media. Some media allow such access, and they allow a category of users to own the discourse, and here lies the risk. There are restrictions against some categories. Some people call that digital discrimination, preventing some users from taking part in the production of this discourse. This highlights the discrimination against this category and preventing it from having their voice heard. There are some Palestinian research centers that are trying to uncover discrimination against Palestinians. There are several stories that were published in relation to preventing Palestinians from taking part in the content and discourse production. How can we put an end to hate speech? This hinges on several factors, including, first and foremost, culture in communities and societies, in addition to education. There should be a media education within curriculum for they can mitigate some of the risks in this relation. I will stop at this level and give it to the other speakers if they would like to comment. نعطي الكلمة إلى نايجل للإجابة. شكراً.
Media education is also a point that I had. I actually just noted it down as media literacy because it is something that definitely would vest power in the citizen, would vest power in the consumer, and will indeed enhance accountability, because if one is media literate, if one is able to decipher what is credible from what is not, if one is able to decipher between an opinion in the free expression market and from what is actually obtaining or what is reality, then that particular citizen will be able to push back some of the issues that we're discussing. There were questions around fake news being profitable, which could somewhat be linked with media capitalism. And in my submission, I would perhaps want to debunk a certain myth that has been sustained and carried a lot in media discourse. Myths such as sensationalism sells, if it bleeds, it sells, and that, you know, if it is able to generate a critical hype, it sells. It may perhaps sell, but not in beyond any, you know, beyond any distance. It's not sustainable. It is clickbaiting exists pretty much for a very short period, and it's perhaps easy come, easy go. And how we are only able to build that civil resistance is through media literacy, is through empowering citizenry, and it is through engagement with those that are owning these platforms, engagement with those that are drivers of content within these platforms. Because what we've got is a real dichotomy of, you know, those that were always manufacturing content pre-social media, those that used a top-down approach insofar as the information discourse was concerned. Now we have an opportunity where citizens can be empowered, can be literate to push back. And it is actually a power that we can, if we invest in them being able to build that resistance, we can be able to have cleaner spaces for engagement. And then lastly, on the question of credibility, with the rise of new search engines, with the rise of new techs, artificial intelligence, and so forth. I think when I made the submission that we need to strengthen journalism, I need to just expand more that we need to strengthen professional journalism, which is anchored on the science of verification. If information gathering is going to just take a search engine without the necessary means of verifying, without the necessary means of investigating, without the necessary means of ensuring that there is a balance in the discourse, it ceases to be journalism. It becomes just, you know, the free expression and the marketplace of various opinions. But if journalism is going to remain a science of verification, if it's going to remain a science that balances contesting and interprets the global and national questions of the day, then whether these search engines and artificial intelligence are going to expand, we'll still have a space that is protected for information that could be credible. Thank you.
Thank you. نحن الميكروفون محمد بوزيدي.
Okay, I would like to add some thought to your question raised before. I think it's not just for is a manifestation of a capitalism. Social media is a manifestation of a capitalism of the haves and the have-nots, the have most and the have least, at the expense of the have least. And this is a big concern. But we have to take it from this side. We have to see the social media a double-edged sword, which can counter the hegemony of those institutions by creating new content, cloning people with each other, and countering such meta-narrative that exists within the media landscape, or you name it, and profiting those peoples, because they need money to survive, to make their ends meet. So this is the danger of the danger and the benefits of social media in a really capitalistic era that we cannot deny its effect and its influence on people's life. I think.
Bruce, last but not least.
Thank you. I think I had, there were three questions. I'll begin with your question, Professor Hamada. Now, I think what we are seeing here is nothing new, right? As you rightly pointed, media capitalism is the order of the day. I mean, media capitalism, as Marx suggested, would not work particularly where there's no legitimacy. The way it works is first, and we actually see it also today with social media. When social media came, or when it was introduced to all of us, we were meant to believe that it was a matter of staying in contact with family, finding information. We never thought about disinformation, misinformation, and the rest that has come as a direct result of social media presence. I think it came to us under the pretext that it was legit and it was going to help us. And so once the legitimacy was gained, then I think it's easy for social media for social media to have hegemonic powers on us, because obviously, we tend to be on the consuming side. But as I said also in my talk, I do not just think that it is just a matter of blaming the capitalists or the media capitalists. I think the question is also, what are we doing with that? And I think societies, particularly here in the global south, we tend to maybe not be very critical, particularly in realizing that it started with colonialism and it was repackaged as globalization, and we there are more people here in the South that actually think that social media or globalization is actually much better for them. This does not, and going to the question from the other student, does not mean that I do not see the benefits, of course, of social media or of globalization. But it would be almost like waste of time for me to come here to promote globalization or to say the good things about globalization. I think what our job is to critique, is to be with the masses, the people who actually are affected by these policies. So in as much as I actually see the benefits, I think the key I see my job more as standing with the people who are actually affected, who continue to be marginalized by policies that are instituted as a direct result of these technologies. And of course, going to your question, I do not really think that there is one size fits all. There's one solution to all this. The only reason why I see going back to the basics as maybe a potential solution is just simply because it's something that is tried and tested, that we have actually lived and that we have actually seen. But that I think current generations or even people of today seem to be despising. They do not really realize that, or we don't seem to realize that, we have actually lived, successful lives before, these technologies. And I feel that it is really important to pay allegiance to the communities where we also come from, because my problem is also the fact that all these solutions, if you look at, for example, at this conference, it's only the elites, it's the academics, the educated, the people who seem to be leading this discourse. Where are the people who perhaps have never been to school or who have never been I have never went to university? I think these are the people that we also need to talk to, because when it comes to disinformation or misinformation, they are the ones who are actually on the forefront of sharing these fake news or these vices. So I think there's need to have a collaboration between all parts of society, and not just for us to think or to stay in our bubble to think that we have the answers, because I firmly believe that the answers are somewhere else, but not in this room. Thank you very much.
نشكر المتحدثين
We would like to thank the panelists and the participants for enriching this session with their input and questions. I call upon each and everyone here to continue this debate during the lunch break, because this session, if anything, has raised several questions.
Lunch, and we will be back at 2:10. أذكر الجميع بأننا سنعاود الجلسة الثانية في هذا المؤتمر على الثانية.
Lunch break, and we will resume our second session at 2:20 sharp.
What is the role of these networks in ideological polarization? How can they be used to promote democracy and human rights? Social media networks and ideological polarization.